Welcome today. My name's Debbie. I'm a clinical psychologist in the south of Johannesburg, and I'd like to discuss a therapeutic technique that I work with and that I'm busy doing training with as well. And within the technique, I'd like to discuss states of being relative to solving problems. So we'll just briefly run through an introduction into what we're working with states of beings, and then describe the technique that I work with in that way. So we'll start off with a quote from Einstein. He said that you cannot solve problems from the same state of thinking that it was created. So what I'd like to look at is that as well, but I'd like to extend that even to more than just a state of thinking, but also to a state of being. Because we know that states of being are a direct consequence of our states of thinking, and they are interlinked in a lot of ways as well. So the first state of being that we'll be looking at today is the child state. If we look at the medical hypnoanalysis, one of the underlying premises is that the unconscious mind has the logic of a child. So when we're working with the unconscious mind, we're not working with the intellectual, rational, conscious part of us. We're working with the unconscious part of us. So in that way, to appeal to the child aspect of us, we have to work with slightly different ways. We have to work with stories and drawings and creative ways of appealing to the child. Because the child aspect of us, or state of being, doesn't listen to intellectual information. If it did, we would be able to make all the changes in our life that we need to make. Because we all intellectually know a lot of things about everything. But unconsciously, when we are dealing with the problems in our life, that information that we know intellectually is not available to us on that level, because we act contrary to what we know. A lot of times we know, even with addictions, we know I've got to stop smoking and all the good reasons intellectually why. But when the time comes to it, our body is doing something contrary to that, and we're still smoking our cigarettes or whatever it is. So that's why the process that we need to do is to educate the child part of us, and to bridge the information from the conscious mind to the unconscious mind. So often we fixate it as a child, and because a lot of the information intellectually doesn't bridge down into that part of us. And the child learns experientially, not intellectually. So the learning process of the child is like learning to ride a bicycle. You can't learn to ride the bicycle with a book. You've got to be able to do it with the body. So the child is held in the body part of us. And about 80% of our functioning does come from our body, from the child part of us. Because when we get angry or when we react, we often do become instinctively the child, and we get fixated there. So obviously we know the feminine principle is to do with the love, the warmth, the peace, the balance, the calm, the wholeness, radiance, empowerment, understanding, empathy, etc. So it's what the ideal mother would embody for the child. And it's the competence, the principle of the feminine is that wholeness, where it's almost similar to sunshine, where the light of the sunshine doesn't get put out with the presence of the adult female. The mother and the father principles are aspects of the conscious mind. Because the conscious mind is the ability to reason, to be rational, to be intellectual. It's the part of our conscious mind that does know everything. So these are the important states, which is the mother and the father, which need to be accessed inside of us so that we can access them for ourselves when we are being the child. The adult, which is the father or the adult male, that's action made manifest. It's to do with the male principle of being very focused, clear, assertive, confident, setting boundaries, bringing in truth. He's very confrontational, it's got leverage and gives consequences, etc. It's a state of being which is very male, very assertive, very getting things done, solving problems, and being able to bring solutions. So parallels are investigated between the way in which the story is told originally and the circumstantial and physical events that occur in daily life. There are direct parallels between the way you tell the story and what's happening in your life. And there's a direct correlation between those. And everybody does tell the story differently, but you can see what's happening and how you're coping with life and problems in your life in that way. So the technique is called the LRRH reconditioning technique. LRRH stands for the story that I work with, which is Little Red Riding Hood. So that's the story that I work with, which holds all the dynamics of the unconscious mind, and it's a very practical tool for as a projective technique to understand what's happening on a deeper level. Okay, so the way in which you tell the story will indicate your unconscious dynamics and belief systems, and then we desensitize and reprocess these dynamics to bring in the balance of the mother, father, and child via the story. The story of Red Riding Hood is the story of a little child whose mother packs her basket and she walks through the forest. She meets the wolf in the forest who redirects her down the wrong road to go to Granny. The wolf then runs ahead and eats the Granny, puts the Granny in his tummy and waits for Red Riding Hood to come along. When Red Riding Hood gets there, the wolf pretends to be Granny. So the definitions and characters of the story, the first one is Little Red Riding Hood. So she obviously represents the unconscious mind. So when you're being the child in the story, you're actually accessing your own unconscious mind. So you're actually adopting that perspective, means you are seeing now your thought processes and patterns on an unconscious level. It's to do with the inner child. It's the key to creativity, spontaneity, focus in the moment, passion, and life force and your authenticity, etc. Because when you are being the child is its own true self. It just acts from the heart in that way. Okay, so the next character as they appear is the Granny. Granny does represent our future self. It's the highest, best future that we want to be approaching as the child. Along the way we meet the trials and tribulations. The Granny is also to do with our inner empowerment. It's our ability to love ourselves. It's the unconditional love that's inclusive. It's to do with a lot of wisdom, and it's the female power. So the Granny embodies that because the Granny is the mature adult that is female, and it's unconditionally very loving. And that's the love that the child is approaching to be able to receive in our future that we want. The wolf. So the wolf is obviously the illusions that we encounter along our journey in life. It's to do with deception. It's the shadow part of us in Jungian terms. It's the conditional love, because the wolf says, I love you, Red Riding Hood, but I'm going to eat you. And the Granny says, I love you for who you are. So the child needs to know the difference between those two kinds of love, because often the child doesn't know. The woodcutter is obviously the principle in the story which represents the higher adult male perspective. It's to do with action and actualization. It's the ability to do what you say and act on what you know. It's the higher vision that the woodcutter's got. He's very logical, analytical. It's the male principle, very assertive, brings results, has impact, and brings change for the better. So it's that state of being that we need to access for ourselves, where we can solve problems and do it. A lot of people, if you don't have a woodcutter in your story, are not going to be able to access that state of being for yourself fully at the right time. If you think about the logic of the unconscious, if you as the child think that the wolf is Granny, will you need a woodcutter in your story? If you think the wolf is Granny, and you've got to get love from Granny, so you might try and please Granny. So you might not even have the need for a woodcutter in your story. Does that make sense? If you're a child and you think the wolf is Granny, you're going to be busy trying to get love out of this Granny no matter what it takes. Even if it means pleasing Granny to get it, or getting sick, or educating Granny, or changing Granny, or whatever. But you won't know that it's the wolf. And then you won't know that the cigarette is bad for you. You'll think that cigarette is Granny and it's making me feel good. And 80% of you will think that this addiction thing is Granny. Even in relationships that are abusive, you might be being abused by your relationship. You might think it's Granny. So on an unconscious level, you won't need a woodcutter to make changes because you're busy trying to get love from it. And this is quite an important thing because it does start to solve a lot of addictive cycles once the child gets at the difference between the wolf and the Granny. So it's to look, and there's a lot of ways that we can pick up this confusion via the story. So the obvious ways of telling the story is not always a lot of indications. There's a lot of other ways that we look at that. But it's a primary core of a lot of problems, yeah.
Wouldn't that mean that you need the woodcutter more than ever?
If the child thinks the wolf is grainy,
Yeah.
it's going to be thinking it's getting love from grainy. It will think this grainy, because the child thinks the whole world is good. If the wolf is biting the child will think.
But I mean, then why do you say that the child wouldn't?
Oh yes, from a higher perspective it needs a woodcutter even more. But from the child's perspective, it doesn't need a woodcutter. We're talking about the logic of the child. In the child's little mind, it won't think it needs a woodcutter because it will think the grainy is all I've got for love. And the child will settle for 2% of love because it's all that it's got, even if it's been bitten. The child will say, okay, the wolf's biting me, but I need love, so 2% is better than nothing. I'll take that 2%. And maybe if I change myself, then the wolf will give me more. If I please the wolf and I become perfect like the wolf wants me to, then it'll give me 60% love, maybe. But it's a never-ending search for that unconditional love, but the child is looking in the wrong place. Okay. Are there any questions related to your own stories as examples? Did anything happen in your own stories that you'd like to maybe just get clarity on, or anything else that's relevant?
I'm interested because it's very similar to that, but my story ended there.
Yes.
She opened the door, she had a little, looking like, but she looked like a wolf. I was like, you're a wolf.
Yeah.
So that's the story to ever.
Okay, oh well, that's good, yeah. So it's the same thing, not identifying the illusion. Some people either see the wolf or they see the grainy. But if there's no forward movement, your unconscious just doesn't know what to do with it. And it doesn't get eaten. If you don't get eaten in the story, what do you think it means? Things don't happen to me. I'm fine. I don't get eaten. Yeah. It's that can't go there because I don't know what a grainy, what a wolf is and what a woodcutter is. So let's just not go there and deal with it. And let's just get stuck now and not move forward.
Can it also be like a naivety though?
Based on naivety, but it causes stagnation, denial and paralysis. That naivety creates paralysis because I don't know how to cope with that. And I don't even know what a wolf is, and I don't know what it is, what's going on.
Do you ever find, sorry if someone else is next,
Sure.
Do you ever find that people anticipating, you have the knowledge, the full knowledge of the story.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you ever find that people's anticipation of knowing the way the story is going to end interferes with this deep understanding of how these states of being are played out?
Yeah, it can't. What I've seen is you can tell whether the person's telling the story from their head or they're telling it from their body. And when they're telling it from the body, you always get nuances that you wouldn't get from the head. If you're the child and you're standing there, you will say, if you really are embodied as the child in the unconscious mind, you'll bring in things like, oh, I can see the sweat on his skin now and I'm feeling scared, and oh, now I want to run. But you'll get a lot of sensory modalities participating. If you're doing it from the head, there is a whole section to work with a person. It's called the perfect story, telling the perfect story, where they'll tell the story. We're writing it, goes to the thing, she gets eaten, here comes the woodcutter. But it's all cerebral. It's all intellectual. It's like the perfect book, but it means they've disconnected from the body and they're living in their head and they're completely dissociated emotionally and they're numb.
I suppose what you're saying is if they do that, you still get an outcome.
You still do. But then we've got to work on now reconnecting the mind and the body again and accessing the child. It's another form of a death of the child because the person has to live in the head to cope. And it means that now I'm telling the story, but my head is fully overriding my body and I'm telling the perfect story the way that it is now. But there's no participation from the unconscious self at all. Like with your example, your head came in, but the child was still there getting its own little idea. And we want to see the perspective of the child because that's the unconscious mind. And that's where 80% of our problems come from. That's where our function.
So you assume that everybody's story that they tell comes from the child's perspective.
I ask them to be the child. Yeah. So you ask them to be, and you want to see can they do it? Because a lot of people can't be the child.
Sure, but isn't that maybe also like the who said that it's the wolf? I mean, as an adult, you would know it's the wolf.
Yes, but the unconscious mind might not.
So that suggests then that are you not accessing the unconscious mind if you keep it intellectual?
And what happens is a lot of people vary. Some people can access the unconscious mind and hold it for the whole way through. Some people will shift out of the unconscious mind and go into the adult at different points in the story. Some people will be the child walking through the forest, but as soon as they see the wolf, they will hop out of the child and into the intellect to cope. But we want to look at the timing of when they hop out, how long they hop out for, because some people will go in and out. They'll go into the child and out, into the head, into the body of the unconscious and out. Some people will intersperse. Some people will consistently stay as the child. Some people won't access the child at all. And the timing of when they hop out is also very relevant. Some people will hop out of the child when they're in the stomach and they will access the head. So we want to see how are you coping at which point in the story, because that gives you indications of how you're doing it in life as well. But the ideal is to be able to stay present as the child the whole way through until you're eaten, because that means you can cope with everything.
So how do you give the instruction? I mean, do you say, tell the story?
Like I did with you when we did with your eyes closed.
So you
Be the
close your eyes
child.
and tell yourself the story.
The way we did the instructions today, when we did it, that's how we do it. Be the child. There is a book that I've written which has got a step-by-step summary of the whole first phase, and there's another one with the 6 phases. But we've got 6 phases which we run through step by step, which forms the foundation of changing all of that. Yeah.
And have you worked with bipolar?
Yes, I worked a lot with bipolar.
And does it work with people?
Very well.
Really?
With bipolar people, the inner child cannot connect to the granny at all. The bipolar people, the child in them thinks the wolf is granny, and have very, very difficulties trusting a real granny because they don't know the difference. So they can't trust, and they yo-yo quite a lot. But once you can get the inner child with a bipolar to trust the granny principle, to know the difference and to release the wolf, it brings the changes.
What happens if you kill the wolf in the story?
Who killed the wolf?
I did.
As who?
As a child.
Okay, what does that
And then
mean?
Granny's fine. She wasn't
Yeah.
eaten. She
When
was
did you
fine.
kill the wolf? Before you got eaten or after?
No, it wasn't eaten actually.
Oh, so when you walked in, how did you kill the wolf? How did you do it?
I axed him.
Okay, all right, good. Okay, good. What does that mean? And we all do it on another level. What do you think it means if Red Riding Hood kills the wolf with an axe? What does it mean?
Killing the dark side, the shadows.
We want to kill the wolf. We want to do that. But we want to look at how are you doing it. If you're a Red Riding Hood and you're this size and you're looking at the big wolf, who's going to win? If you're a woodcutter and you're looking down on the wolf, who's going to win? If you're looking at the wolf as a child and you think you're killing the wolf, what does it actually mean? It's an illusion of control. The child can never kill the wolf. But there might not be a woodcutter, so the poor old child has to try because it's so missing. So the only one left to do it has to be the child. And then the child gets overburdened and loses because the wolf's going to laugh at you and goes, yes, you've killed me, I'm dead. But he's faking it and he's having a laugh at you when you're not looking.
But Granny is fine in the story. It ends up she wasn't eaten, she actually took a hide.
Okay,
So
yeah.
the wolf isn't dressed as a granny. I don't see myself as this wolf and the child as
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah, because the child in you has had to grow up too soon, too fast. It's had to become the adult too soon. It's role reversal, which means as a child, you didn't have a chance to be a child. You had to go zoops, too fast, too soon. And remember, the granny is our early role model. If your early role model is not being eaten, it means it doesn't happen to me, I'm also fine. So you've learned to see a role model that's in denial. So you're also in denial because no, it's not going to happen to me either. I can also kill the wolf. But it's all illusions of control. And nobody's going to be having happy picnics because you can't be having a happy picnic without a dead wolf. But none of you, so it is that form of denial, and we all do it. But if our role models as a child were doing it, your granny is not a role model that is in the stomach to support the child emotionally, which means when you're in times of trouble, there's nobody there to hold you. So you have to not be eaten and think that you can kill the wolf as the child. But there's no woodcutter in the story, which means the male principle hasn't been integrated as a state of being. It's the child state of being that's trying to kill the wolf. What's going to happen? Tantrums, road rage, anger, because the child can't kill the wolf and the wolf is now and it builds up a lot of anger and emotional congestion because no picnic is coming. And why is my picnic not coming and why is the wolf not dying? And it creates a lot of frustration, and we all do it as well. So it would be to go through the whole process of learning how to be eaten, how to bring the support in, how to access the adult male state of being. Because the child state of being will predominate and think, well, I have to kill the wolf. But the child is always manipulated by the wolf. It's afraid of the anger of the wolf. It will please the wolf. It will try and educate the wolf or change the wolf. The child will say, I'm going to turn that wolf into granny by teaching it. But you expend a lot of energy into something that's futile. It's like changing the storm while you're in the boat. I'm going to stop the storm and change it, rather than managing it. One child said, oh, the granny and the wolf are making a joke on me, and they're in cahoots with me, and they're out to get me now. And so you get a lot of variations of really interesting stories. But it shows you the depth of what they're dealing with.
And is it just as successful with adults?
Very successful with adults. All adults, because it's our unconscious mind is a child, whether you're an adult or a child, it's the same thing. Even if you're an adult, the unconscious mind is still a child. And most adults have got confusion on an unconscious level. 80% of adults that have seen don't know the difference between a wolf and a granny, which is why they've got addictive cycles on all levels. All addictions can be healed when they actually realize what's going on a deeper level. So it goes to the core origins of a lot of problems as well. And it brings a lot of relief in a very short period of time once it's integrated for a lot of people, yeah. So it's really rewarding in that way because it's an ongoing process of education. Yeah. So I do the training modules where the first module you have to undergo your own therapy process, because before you actually work with it in your own therapeutic applications, you need to have done your own process first so that you can experientially understand it. Because there's module 1, module 2, and in module 3, when we do case studies and we work on, then we actually show you the parallels between your own unresolved stuff and what you're dealing with your clients, because you will project it. So that's why if you haven't done your own therapy process, it compromises your own therapeutic applications of it. So that's why it is important to have done the training if you're going to work with it in your own practices as well. I have had some people, I went and did a talk in Germany, and one lady read the book and started doing it in her own practice. But she came up with a lot of challenges and she hadn't done the training. There's module 2 and 3, which is the training. And she came with a lot of criticisms and a lot of judgments, but she hadn't actually learnt the technique. And so she was coming up with these hurdles. So that's why I do emphasize now that it's important to have done the training before you apply it in your own practices, because there's a lot of depth and a lot of layers. And I've been working with it now for about 20 years. So I work with all the resistances, all the challenges. It's all written up there now, which helps you to actually work with a lot of problems that do arise while you're in the therapeutic process. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? I do it. I go to Cape Town and Durban, and I also do it at venues like over here. Just depends on the amount of people that are interested. I also work from home in the south of Joburg. I also do training from my own home as well. Yeah, but I do it wherever there's a demand for it. And it is CPD accredited as well. So if anybody's interested, it is CPD, you do get points for that as well. Or should we move on a little bit? Are there any other questions that are relevant? Should we move on a little bit more to more information? I'm not going to go into the next case example. I'm just going to run through these. This is just more case examples that I've done. This is just a quick having a look at an example of the child who's going to save the granny. Often Red Riding will say, I'll save granny, which is role reversal as well. That often happens. Role reversal, Red Riding Hood becomes the woodcutter, like for Ruth there. Red Riding Hood is missing the granny, then she'll become the granny. There's a missing woodcutter principle sometimes, and the child will become a target for the wolf. I work a lot with trauma, and with trauma you can always see why they are a victim. It's because their unconscious mind thinks the wolf is granny and doesn't have a granny or a woodcutter. And they're direct correlations as to the traumatic event itself. But I won't go into that because that's a whole subsection in itself to do with trauma. Okay. Okay, I won't go through this one. We'll just quickly go through that. This is another case example which I won't go through. Okay. This is just a little idea of how the wolf thinks. The wolf thinks, oh, I love it when Red Riding Hood thinks I'm granny because I've got her. And no, Granny, don't worry, I'm better than nothing, is what the wolf says to Red Riding Hood. If there's no Granny, the wolf has said, don't worry, Red Riding Hood, I'll be your granny. So the child will have to take that and make do. The wolf will always say, you've got no woodcutter, don't worry, who needs him when I'm here as your granny? So it will confuse the child to think that the woodcutter is the granny. If Red Riding Hood is the woodcutter or mistrusts the woodcutter, which means Red Riding Hood is killing the wolf with the axe like you're doing there, then the wolf says, she's stuck with me because now the wolf's got her because she thinks she's winning, but it's not, it's an illusion. So the wolf has got, if Red Riding Hood thinks she's the woodcutter, it's going to cause problems. Okay. The wolf also says, little Red Riding Hood thinks it's her fault I ate her, because if the child's got guilt, then if she pleases me enough, I will love her maybe. So then he'll tell Red Riding Hood, please me, and then I'll give you the love, because it's all your fault. It is your fault that I ate you. And he'll play on the guilt and make the child always ask, how can I change myself? What must I do? What's wrong with me? How can I please you? Let me jump when you say jump, and then I'll get the love that I'm looking for. But you never get it. So the destructive cycle, let's have a look at that. Starts off with the confusion between truth and illusion right at the top. Red Riding Hood thinks the wolf is Granny. That leads to guilt. It's my fault, in the corner on the right there, where the child will say, what have I done wrong? That Granny's eaten me. Then the anger will implode, because if the child's angry, can the child be angry with Granny? No, because Granny's the wolf. Can't be angry there. So where does the anger go? It implodes into the child and creates depression. Or the child will be angry with the real Granny, which means those that you love will get the brunt of your anger, rather than the perpetrator. So you'll kick the dog rather than the boss, because the boss is telling you, I'm Granny, I'm giving you your money and I'm keeping you alive. So the anger gets distorted. Then it leads to rejection of change, where the child won't want to change, it'll just want to please the wolf. And that leads to stagnation and isolation, and eventually to repetition of patterns. So it sets up that whole negative cycle that we all get caught into. Resistances to change, to embracing the adult states of being, is that the confusion of that. It's the dissociation, it's fear of being the child because it's not safe, as we said. Denial, this is not happening, as we've said. Procrastination, they'll be dawdling in the forest, I don't want to go there. Procrastination, that will mean you'll procrastinate in life a lot. You won't get things done. No movement forward, retreating to the forest, stuck and paralyzed, cannot move beyond that. Guilt is the child, it's my fault. All these will stop you accessing those adult states. And mistrust of the woodcutter, because the woodcutter is going to kill my granny, so I can't kill the wolf, which means you won't be able to say no and set boundaries and be able to get better results. Okay, so the therapeutic process is basically to bring a sense of safety to the child via the new role models. Okay, it's the ability to adopt the perspective of all the aspects of characters with the relevant sequencing. There's a sequence of characters that we run through in the training process, and that's got to be integrated through a lot of repetition. Balance of the male and female principles inside of you, the ability to learn from the past and preventatively implement change, and then boundaries as well. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the sequencing of the characters too much now, also because of the time there's running out. So generationally, these patterns are also passed down, as I said before, where these patterns of our parents, because remember, whatever we're seeing is what's been generationally passed down. So by addressing the family as a whole and by reprocessing these dynamics of each member of the family, it takes the whole family to another level, where these cycles of stagnation and repetition are avoided. And the new generation will embark on constructively managing problems differently. So that's that there. Okay. So in conclusion, just to briefly run through things, the predominant aspect or character that is embodied is the child aspect, and we'll unconsciously react as opposed to consciously respond. And we don't even know that we're doing it. And often we think we're fine, but we actually don't realize that we're not. So that's what we do. That's why that state of being, this is what Einstein said, you can't solve the problem from that same state. You've got to access other ones. And that's not so easy to do. Okay. If a role model is predominantly missing, either symbolically or literally in early childhood, it becomes unavailable as a state of being in your own self when managing and dealing with problems. And the unconscious mind, as we know, has the logic of a child, and the ability to access, embody and adopt those perspectives is determined by exposure to our early role models as well. Okay, so being able to interchange and become all the characters with the corresponding feeling state at the appropriate timing, the balance of the mother-father returns inside of us. And by repetition of the integration of the states, we can achieve that higher self and life purpose and all that. Repetition is very important as part of the learning process of the model. Because remember, when you ride a bicycle, you've got to do a lot of repetition with it. Or it's like going to the gym, you rebuild a new muscle memory. And the same with our belief systems, we actually have to grow new neural connections. But to grow those new neural connections and to create these new belief systems, it has to be done through repetition. So part of the process is repeating a lot of the visual exercises and patterns and that we work through. It's like growing a seed. The seed needs to grow at its own pace, but once it grows, your whole being will have access to new tools that will be integrated into your life very easily. I had one lady who did it and she said, gee whiz, I'm just making these changes and I'm not even trying, but I'm just suddenly now more assertive and it's just happening so naturally. But that's because it's integrated into you. And we want it to become part of new lifestyles where you're not trying, because if you're trying, it doesn't work for long. It's got to become integrated as part of the changes. Okay, so also a flexibility of movement allows the flow of life to return for the empowered future. And globally, as I said before, we are at a point where by taking responsibility for our own lives, we can collectively achieve the empowerment and harmony that we are approaching in that kind of way. Okay, so these are just the workshops that are doing at the next stage. The next one that I'm busy running one right at the moment, but that's a little bit late. But the module 1 is a 6-phase therapeutic process. We run it through. Also do it individually by appointment if anybody would like to do it individually. I do constellations workshops as well, where we constellate the characters of the story of Red Riding Hood. So it's quite fun because it's like role play and it's very Gestalt based on family constellations, but we work with a story. So you get a lot of information in a short period of time because you pick somebody in the group to be the wolf, you pick somebody to be the Red Riding Hood, and then from there we follow the whole process through. But it's quite fun and experiential, a lot of information emerges from that. And I have got a new deck of oracle cards of the Red Riding Hood that we're actually launching tomorrow. So it's a launch tomorrow afternoon. It's a set of cards which has got 42 cards, and each card has got a different application of the story, an application of the pattern. Like one card is that's standing there is Little Red Riding Hood is rescuing Granny, she's holding Granny. But it just shows you at that moment the inner child part of you is becoming the female. So it gives you 42 different cards. That's nice to pick up for yourself every day, just to see where you're at and how you're coping with the problem. It's also nice to work with it therapeutically. I use it quite a lot in my practice, and it's amazing how accurate they are. The people actually see, gee whiz, that is really how I'm functioning at this stage. So it's quite a fun, nice way, but it's got a lot of therapeutic value. They set up deck of cards. I do meditation and healing workshops as well, using sound, movement, and I also work a lot with the story, but we do more visual meditative exercises in the group as well. And you can visit the website if you want any further information. So there are 2 books that I've written. The first one is it's an interpretation, analysis, and application. It just gives you the definitions of the characters, the principles, the themes that are operating. It briefly describes the projective drawing technique as well. But it just gives you an outline and a basic introduction to the whole logic of the unconscious and the first phase of the processing as well. The second book that I've got is it's a handbook, but that covers the 6-phase process step by step of how to do it. It's a nice summary once you've done the 6 phases, just to help you as a summary of that. Okay, then there's also a CD which has just got analogies and metaphors, which helps the unconscious to reprocess. Because the unconscious mind, as we know, relates more to metaphors and analogies as opposed to intellectual reasoning. So that's there as well. So, okay, as you said, the oracle cards that we've just brought out now as well, and they just illustrate and identify many of the definitions and characters of the phases, and it's a nice application that you can use. There's a little booklet that goes with it which describes each card and each kind of belief system that you're working with at that stage there. So I do have some copies available today if anybody would like any of those. I've got copies today. Otherwise, if you can order there. And if you'd like to, if you are interested in doing the training or just doing the first module, you can let me know and you can write your email down there if anybody is interested, and I'll keep you updated as to the next ones. So the first module that I do is just your own therapy process. So anybody can do it. Don't have to be in training or anything. It's just your own experiential process. But the second module is for therapists and all that, where you actually learn how to implement the technique in your own practice. And then the module 3 is the advanced module, where you learn a lot more applications of it and resistances. Well, thanks very much for coming today. I hope you enjoyed and benefited from it. And feel free to contact me and if you've got any further questions. And thanks very much for coming today. I enjoyed that. Good. Thanks.